wherever you, not these three.
Okay.
Yep, and it is open seating, so anywhere else you can.
So just make sure yours is working.
It's not different than last time.
I hope you got some good footage.
I gotta sign into Zoom, don't I?
Yes, yeah, Elson should be.
Do I do it up here?
Yes, it's on that one, yeah. So this is just filming.
Yeah.
Wait, why? I want you to know, I got a photo of Aspen having it in his app, and I'm trying to steal and video. So, it's the story.
Is that your special fancy thing?
Yeah, that's my special fancy thing.
That's her special thing.
Are you gonna allow everyone else to use your clicker?
No, I gotta do it. I don't know, I gotta find my password on it.
Yes. Whether she knows she is or not, yes.
When I hit the meeting, it starts it for, okay, you gotta sign
I
in.
gotta sign in here. Oh,
My
Dave's
James
here.
Garcia.
I don't want you. Is this the switching cup or?
Cool.
He
I
said
got
first, second, third, first.
Cool, so yes,
We figured it out.
No, you're fine.
We had to accept ourselves into the account.
Are we going?
Although
there?
Will, I think Trey and Ruth had decided.
Wait, never mind.
Trey will let you Saturday, don't worry.
Not right now. No, it's Ruth going first. I'm just planning.
If I fail this, it's okay.
You won't fail, Ruth. You'll do great. We've come to support you. Yes, yes.
Guys, we get to see Elson.
We haven't seen him in like years.
So did I just, and Jason.
What else? She doesn't show up to this.
We have
There's
2
no
minutes, Elson, and
participants.
then I gotta
There's no
go.
participants. Hello?
Jonathan Bloom,
Oh, wait.
you're here.
At least you're in there now.
Well, it took a little while, didn't it?
Does Elson know he's presenting?
Hopefully.
You just leave it like that?
Yeah, I guess.
More time
Well,
for
I
questions
gotta
for
go.
us.
Well, he's technically on it.
She texted me.
Yeah, but he's probably.
Yeah,
oh,
but
yeah.
the directions from this, we met this weekend on Saturday and walked through procedures for starting, and then on Sunday we met and then Miss Little sent him a reminder yesterday afternoon.
He might be asleep.
Wake him up.
You may want to message him.
I tried.
Yeah.
I don't have his number.
But we'll need to go live here in about a minute, so.
We'll go in 1 minute.
He probably won't.
Turn your sound off.
Okay, well, but I don't know how to mess it up.
Oh, man. Hey, you got Elson's number?
Yeah.
We're at a loss here.
Oh, wow.
I think that's the first time we run it.
Andy also just texted you.
Yeah, I gotta go in like 1 minute. That's terrifying. Hey, look, it's my sister.
Hey, it's your sister.
Find a seat and sit down.
That's pretty much perfect, that's pretty much exactly like
Wait,
the
Ruth, is
other
that your
one,
mom?
too.
No, sister. 3 years older.
And he, hey, when he was your age,
Too young to be
he
Ruth's
was
mom.
Alright.
no more than a pass ahead of you.
Mm-hmm.
And he lived
Show up.
from the corner.
So we may need to just,
And he went to Florida Brothers.
Elson was
9:14.
together.
It's not 9:15
I
yet.
think we should actually.
Yeah,
Now it is, now it is, now it is.
Shall I go?
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, I'm just gonna ask those of you out in the audience, if you would please put your phones away and be a good, attentive audience. I think we had some great questions last time, and I appreciated the way that you guys were able to interact with our participants here. That's the nice thing about this setting, is that there's an intimacy to this. So just a couple of quick reminders for my presenters. So our camera, where we're live broadcasting to the rest of the campus, is right over here. So when you are looking out at your audience, please remember to smile into the camera over there, and do make sure that you project. You can, because we are socially distanced at the front of the room. I encourage you to take your mask off so long as you are comfortable with that. So we have 4 presenters for today. I'm going to ask each of you to, as you recall from our practices on this, you will introduce yourselves, and then you'll go in order. So I'm just going to remind you of your order. It is Ruth, Trey, Will, and Elson. After that, when you have 2 minutes remaining, I will give you the initial signal, and when you have 1 minute remaining, I will give you the final signal on that. At 10 minutes, just in order to keep us on track, I will give you this, which is the signal that you do need to wrap up at that time. You will go basically back to back, and then we'll begin the question and answer session in the final component of that. As I said, I encourage everyone in our audience to do that. So if you would give our presenters a round of applause, we'll go ahead and begin.
Hi, my name is Ruth Smith, and this is my 7th year at Webb, and I will be speaking on the topic of the war on drunk driving, specifically teenage drunk driving. So imagine with me for a moment someone important to you, a friend, a daughter, a son, etc. And they were at a party where there was drinking, partying, dancing, and they were having fun. And at the end of the party, they got into the car with an intoxicated driver. On the way home, they turn onto a street into oncoming traffic. People try to warn them by honking their horn and flashing their lights, but due to the driver being intoxicated, he ignores them. Eventually, red and blue lights fill the sky as a policeman pulls them over and eventually gets them home. A lot of us have a story similar to this, but a lot of times the ending isn't so nice. Teenage drunk driving is a major problem in America today. So why is it such a huge problem? A majority of high school students will have had alcohol before graduating high school. In fact, within the last 30 days, 22% of 8th graders, 39% of 10th graders, and 50% of high school seniors have had alcohol. While a lot of them have only had a small amount, the Journal of School Health has found that 30% of high schoolers have reported binge drinking, which is 5 or more drinks within the past 30 days. 50% of high school seniors. Why is that percentage so high? The main reason for alcohol consumption is stress, anxiety, and depression. Seniors can feel these emotions a lot their senior year, whether from stress for college, anxieties about their futures, and just a mixture of all 3 throughout the senior year. While these emotions can lead to drinking, the Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs claims that a family dynamic can help decide and determine the amount of alcohol use in teens. A family that keeps alcohol easily accessible to children and drinks in their presence a lot, the child can become desensitized to the dangers of alcohol and can find it easily accessible. While a family that keeps alcohol out of the reach of children and only drink occasionally and in moderation, the child can become sensitized to the dangers of alcohol and will not be able to find it easily. While there are many exceptions to this scenario, a majority of times this is the case. Another way in which family can determine alcohol use in teens is the relationship between parent and child. A child that has a good relationship with their parents is less likely to drink, while a child that has a bad relationship with their parents is more likely to. While family can determine a child's attitude towards alcohol, major events such as COVID-19 can increase the amount consumed. During COVID-19, there was a surge of alcohol consumption and the dangers that stem from it. In March of 2020, the United States went into lockdown. Schools shut down, and the rules were put in place that we must stay 6 feet apart and wear a mask at all times. Due to this, students were not getting the normal human interaction that they would normally get at school. That caused them to become lonely and depressed. On top of that, there are a lot of anxieties that stem from all the unknowns. There was the unknown of when the vaccine would come out, the unknown of when we'd be able to see friends and family again, the unknown of when the lockdown would end, and the unknown of when school would start again. A lot of times teenagers disregarded the rules and still had parties and organizations. At these parties and organizations, alcohol was usually accessible. Due to school being out and the depression and anxieties from COVID-19, there was nothing stopping students from using alcohol as a way to release these anxieties and depressions. So what can we do to help solve this problem? Here are some solutions. First is lessening availability. One way to lessen availability is to raise the drinking age. By raising the drinking age, it would make it less available to high school students. Two studies done by Dr. Frank J. Chaluka and Henry Welschler, a lecturer from Harvard, have proven that by raising the drinking age, it will significantly decrease the amount of youth motor vehicle accidents. Another way is to strengthen enforcements on already existing policies, such as the zero tolerance laws and creating more severe consequences for drunk driving. While all of these options will significantly decrease teenage drunk driving, they take a long time to put in place, and a lot of parents and students don't have the time. Another solution is a parent pact. A parent pact is a contract between parent and child, claiming that if the child gets into a situation where they have been drinking or their driver has been drinking and they need a safe ride home, they can contact their parents and they will get them home safely. A lot of times the contract claims that the parent will not berate or punish the child until the next day, sometimes even not at all. However, a parent is not likely to use this option, a child is not likely to use this option due to the fear of how the parent will react. The fear of losing their phone, car, or any other privileges, and sometimes just the disappointment from their parents can cause a child to not contact their parents when needed, making the contract obsolete. Another pact, similar to the parent pact, is a student pact between two students. In this pact, if one student was in a situation, they could contact another student to come and pick them up. However, teenagers are not very reliable, so the chance of your friend being able to come and pick you up is slim. The best solution is to increase awareness. Programs such as SAD, Students Against Destructive Decisions, are great for increasing awarenesses in schools. Luckily, Webb already has a program like this in place, called Feet to Feet, which was started by Mike Quinn. Feet to Feet has two main goals. The first is to mentor new students, and the second is to aid students in living an anti-drug, anti-alcohol life. While Feet to Feet does a great job, there are a couple of places where we can improve. First is by putting up posters and making announcements in chapel. By putting up posters and making announcements in chapel, we can remind people of the Feet to Feet Club and its goals. The second is to create a newsletter or website. By creating a newsletter or website, we can make it easier for students to contact us with questions, and also we can give it to other schools who are wanting to create a program similar to Feet to Feet. While it's important to increase awareness amongst students, it's also important to increase awareness amongst parents. Mothers Against Drunk Driving is a great program for parents to get involved in. In fact, 94% of Americans are familiar with MAD and its purpose. Its purpose is to spread information about drunk driving and to lessen the amount of drunk driving accidents. All parents need to do to get involved is to find a chapter near them and jump right in. We all need to work together to stop this dangerous behavior. As the founder of this school once said, "Do not be a spectator, take a hand in the game." Thank you.
So, hello. My name is Trey Snell. This is my 7th year at Webb. And for my senior symposium, I decided to talk to you all about the student leadership problems at Webb. So, without further ado, leading young leaders leads to better leaders. How much student leaders affect the school and why the school should affect them even more. So what exactly is a student leader? Well, that, and that. These are all student leaders. For example, we've got Feet to Feet here when they were trying to do a senior night back in December. We have Lord Winston A. Dugdale lording over his plants for the Horticulture Club. And we also have William Taylor, the president of Honor Council. So what do student leaders do? Well, all kinds of things. Currently, the big thing that student leaders that I'm talking to are doing is we're planning prom, and we're actually actively doing prom. I personally stayed at the prom venue until 10 o'clock last night, and there are even people who say they're even later. There's also Feet to Feet, who does tons of stuff. We are planning a zoo trip. We are taking middle schoolers downtown, and of course, encouraging anti-drug, anti-alcohol usage. So, how much does this community lead? Well, I sent out a survey to the web students, and as you know, every student makes it their life goal to answer surveys. So, I'm sure every student I asked answered their survey, right? So, from that survey, I got about 28% of students are student leaders, and about 72% are not. So, I was then working with Ms. Sullins, and I got this data, where 50% of clubs are faculty run, about 33% are run purely by students, and about 16.7% are run as a combined effort with students and faculty. So what? Why does it matter? Well, we have a problem, and it's twofold. Number one, most students are thrown into this position unprepared. I want you to imagine with me for a second here. You're living in your family, and there's recently a new child in here. Now, either your brother or your father, some person in your family goes out to your pool in your backyard, because you have a pool. Hope you knew that you have a pool in your backyard. And he picks up the new baby, and you're expecting him to just like take him in the water and help him swim a little bit. No. He picks up the baby, pulls him behind his head, and throws him as far as he can into the water. That's how Webb treats his student leaders. Now, of course, they're not actively holding us under the water and trying to drown us most of the time, so that's good. But, for example, back in 8th grade, I decided that I wanted to run an improv club. And hey, I've seen other seniors run clubs. If people up there can do it, why can't I do it? Because I'm a little 8th grader and I can't control people. But after a semester of fighting for it, I finally got an improv club passed. And you know what that led for me to do? It led for me to have to be in charge of seniors. A little 8th grader who had no leadership skills had to be in charge of seniors. So, I went to the only resource that I had, which was my father, who's been bossing people around for a living. And after I did that, I was able to actually lead the people around because I had someone in my life who could help me with leadership skills. But not everyone has that. So, here's a solution. A new class at Webb. A leadership and social skills class. Now, the first problem that I encountered with this idea is the fact that, as some of you know, we have a WILD class, and the WILD actually stands for an acronym, and the L in WILD stands for leadership. However, WILD is a 4-letter word, which means that the leadership only gets at most 25% of the attention in that class. And even then, WILD is pushed off to be a sophomore year class for reasons that you will see if you ever take a WILD class. So, I think that a leadership and social skills class could be an elective that could possibly give a arts credit or something to that effect. Maybe possibly even replacing the physical education class we now have, to where students could take this and possibly either have a higher chance of being able to start a club or be recognized and give their club more power. So, for example, let them take trips off campus if they have the funding for it, like the zoo trip. And going back to the analogy earlier, this would be helping the baby swim. So, problem number 2. There is not enough time in the day. And teachers are already overworked, as well as students. So, I didn't take a math this year, so I wanted to torture myself. So here we go. There were 24 hours in a day. Of those, you spend 7 hours of those days at school. Of those 7 hours, you spend 3 of those hours doing an after-school activity because those are still required, especially if you're a boarder. Of those, you spend about an hour commuting to and from school, assuming you live in Murfreesboro. Then you spend 2 hours doing homework, roughly. Well, no, you spend 2 hours doing eating and things like that. Then you spend 8 hours sleeping because you know everyone is supposed to get 8 hours of sleep and everyone does get 8 hours of sleep, right? Right? Then you spend 2 hours of that doing homework and eating with your family because you know socializing is important. And then you spend 1 hour of that on your phone because you know you're spending at least 1 hour of that on your phone. Web students are not that motivated. So that leaves us with 0 hours left in a day. And you know, it sucks when you run out of time in a day. So the answer is simple. We just need to create more time. But how is the question we always are asking ourselves. How do we create more time? Well, really, it's quite simple. You know how we had a club once a week and a what was called Feet Life once a week last semester? What if we just turned Feet Life into a study hall or a planning period? I mean, we always had planning periods for teachers, and yes, students, leaders don't have to put the same amount of work into their classes as teachers do, but what if they did? What if students were able to put the same amount of time and effort into their clubs as teachers? Could you imagine just going to a club that a student is just, hey guys, I don't have a plan for today, so yeah, we're just gonna just have fun. Could you imagine instead going into a club and go, hey guys, so I've got a plan for today. Today we're going to be blowing up the moon. Now, that's just an example that is probably not actually going to happen because I don't think Webb has the resources to blow up the moon. But it'd still be a more interesting way to start the clubs, and people would be able to be revitalized by having one club and one planning period would be a great change, at least in my opinion. And there's also the fact that student leaders are very overworked, and most people who I know who are student leaders are two student leaders at once somehow. For example, I run both my clubs, both improv and Feet to Feet. And then I know that there are other people who run both their clubs. For example, I know Zoe Nicholson ran both of her clubs when she still had two clubs. So when they changed the schedule from having one club every 2 weeks to having two clubs a week, that really messed with most student leaders because it, at the worst, half the time they could work on their club planning, if not quartered it. So finally, I'd like to end on this. Any of you who took ethics were supposed to read The Schoolmaker. I know not many of you did because, quite frankly, it's not exactly the most fun book to read, but this is the last line of The Schoolmaker. The government was for the students still. The government of the school was for the students still. This proves just how much student leadership matters to the school. If that is the last line of the book that we have to study about this school, about the founder of our school, this proves just how much student leadership matters to this school. This student leadership is the pillar that the school walks on. And if we break this pillar, if this pillar is weak enough that our student leaders feel like they're crumbling, the whole thing comes crashing down. This is my work cited, and thank you very much.
Hey, we'll wait just a second. Let me see if
Yeah, so I think Elton is in there. And this is actually perfect because we have 2 minutes until the next slot starts, so.
I see no one.
I didn't have any idea what the pillow thing is until I got up there.
Shouldn't they be right there in that? Oh, you can see right there.
He just noticed me now, my something is not updated. May you please check if this is the right link?
Oh, is he going to Dr. Candy's? Because Dr. Candy sent me the announcement that we need to go to his.
Well,
Remember when we used to go to
yeah.
Dr. Candy's all the
Just
time?
message him your-
I don't have.
We had to find his own code.
Thank you.
Trey, is that one you sent in that group text?
Yeah,
correct?
that's
Yes,
the
that's
meeting
the correct
ID.
one.
That's the correct meeting ID.
Did he just email you?
He did, yeah, I think. If you want to just have him message you.
It is Dr. Candy's school.
Why is he in the, I don't even know. I don't know why he sent it to us.
So I'll just say Elson seems for Lindsay known.
Oh, here he
That
is.
works?
I'll, yeah. Okay. All right, well, I guess you can roll.
You know, just that with your mom. Okay.
Minimize this.
Yeah, just mine.
You still have 30 seconds,
No, I
just
want
in
you to
case you
present
need it.
my presentation.
Okay. Hello everyone, my name is William Taylor. This is my 7th year at Webb, and for my senior project, I decided to research stealing with a focus on children and teenagers and relate that to a problem here at Webb. So to begin with, stealing is a problem in many high schools across America, and this is largely due to the fact that the environment at many high schools almost encourage bad habits, leaving some of the students a bit confused, almost dazed, and in this gray area of justification versus rationalization in which they don't necessarily understand their actions and why they're wrong. But I believe that with improved education and policies implemented into that, bad behaviors can be fixed. So I crafted this chart to basically sum up who and why people might steal. Children tend to steal for want, while teenagers tend to steal for need. And there's lots of context involved into this. As you can see, the people who steal for need generally have reasons why. And this graph could go on for ages, but I summed it up with one word: context. And it's also paired with this moral identity dilemma that I discussed a little bit earlier, in which it's almost confusing necessarily why somebody might steal. Whereas people who steal for desire, mostly children, but teenagers or adults can steal for desire too, tend to steal because they have motivation or because their mindset isn't necessarily understood in those particular situations. So I'll start talking about children first, because children are a little bit easier to understand. And much like this image of the squirrel from Ice Age, this is kind of what a child sees. There's an object that captivates them, this metaphoric acorn, and they're a bit immature. When they steal, it tends to be more impulsive, and so understanding that mindset is pretty important when looking at why a child might steal. There are a few things that parents and school teachers should look out for and correct when possible, and that's consistency and lying. If a child steals more than once, then they're definitely not learning from what they originally thought. They're just not learning. And if a child lies, it's good and bad, because it proves that they do feel guilty about what they did and that they actually know what they're doing is wrong. But it's bad because they're trying to cover it up. So now I'll move on to to the teenagers. And teenagers are very complicated to understand, as well as adults. And that's because there's a lot of context that's involved in this too. And it's important to consider because, like many bad behaviors, context parallels in ways similar to such as bullying, in which a teenager may have underlying problems such as parental, financial, home troubles that can essentially affect their choices. And resulting bad history can lead to bad choices. And to go along with this movie theme here, they may feel kind of like this Robin Hood character, in which they're stealing for what they think is the right thing. They feel the need to steal it, and when they're caught, they're almost dazed and confused about why it's wrong. They feel the need to. So with that in mind, is it really that bad? And I think I'll go into the effects, and the effects kind of work like dominoes, hence why it's called the domino effect. And it works both ways too, positive and negative. So one bad habit on the negative side is something as small as lying and cheating, relative to the largest alcohol smoking addiction. Kind of works like dominoes, and there's a catalyst that sort of speeds everything up, and that's called excuse making. Excuse making is dangerous, and this is something that school teachers, administration, and parents should look out for, because it turns into this gray area of understanding. Let's say a student stole something and felt guilty about it, but then after a few excuses were made, they no longer feel guilty, and they feel like they actually had a reason to do it sufficient enough to steal. And now that I talked about the effects, I'll start talking about the causes. Most relevant to this and most important are zero tolerance policies. Zero tolerance policies, they have their own place in society, but as far as the schools go, it shouldn't be in schools. And I'm using this picture here because it kind of symbolizes a zero tolerance policy. In it, we have the Salem witch trials, in which a woman convicted of a crime, if that's what you want to call it, is now facing an extreme punishment, possibly being burnt at the stake. And this kind of sums up a zero tolerance policy, and when minuscule actions are followed by severe consequences. And to give you an example, today in our school, if you were to go to the web dining hall and take the utensils that we use, the dull butter knife, the dull metal one that you can barely cut your steak with, and place that in some public school environments, that student might face suspension. And schools take it very seriously there. And to us, it's very bizarre, not necessarily understood, but there's severe consequences, ultimately resulting in student emotional damage and kind of trauma. They're labeled as troublemakers by administration, and they're not necessarily created themselves a bad reputation, they're almost given it by the administration. So that's why zero tolerance policies do not have a place in the school setting. So now, taking all of this into consideration, how do I relate this to Webb? How could Webb, of all places, have a stealing problem? I mean, we have an honor council, an honor code in which students pledge not to lie, cheat, and steal. And I think by looking at this image, you all know where I'm getting at. When it is raining, the umbrellas are gone. And that is because people are hiding them frantically or people are taking them. And so, being at Webb, understanding this, and pairing my research of stealing with this problem, I was able to come up with a proposed solution. And that's for the Webb School to have a fundraiser, maybe a Jeans Day, in which students donate money, and that money is taken and used to purchase umbrellas and placed into every building on campus. And this is a long, detailed plan. I don't have 10 minutes to explain it, but students can sign their name and take an umbrella for about 24 hours. And to kind of find the demand for this, I asked a few questions on a survey. The questions were, have you ever stolen an umbrella? Have you ever had an umbrella that was stolen from you? Did you ever forget, break, or lose an umbrella while on campus? And do you think missing umbrellas is a problem at Webb? And here's the results. As you can see on the first question, most students said they have never taken an umbrella. There were a few honest ones. And the second question, most students have said that they have had an umbrella taken from them, and the rest of the questions kind of follow the same general trends. The only problem with this survey is it was somewhat small, a little more than 10% of Webb's population, which is just big enough for it to be independent of answers from one another. But the only problem is that there's a ratio problem between the first question and the second question, in which students that claim that they have stolen umbrellas is too big to the students that say that they have umbrellas stolen from them, which could have two possibilities. The first one is that students lied to me and were like, no, I never stole an umbrella. Or the second one is that there's a very, very small percent of students at Webb who steal a rather large number of umbrellas. Possible, just kind of unlikely. So the application to Webb, taking all of this in and baking kind of all my ideas and research about stealing, looking at the context, the zero tolerance policies, I think this would be really good for Webb to consider adding into their system, because this, my proposed solution would eliminate the need for students to steal umbrellas, and students wouldn't have to go outside fearing that they're going to get wet, and it's torrential, and they're not going to have their umbrella stolen from them. Likewise, I think that the students who are caught stealing umbrellas shouldn't face severe consequences like going to the Honor Council. It's a pretty severe thing to go to the Honor Council for stealing something so simple. Instead, I think students should feel a little bit more guilty, and maybe the teachers should be a little bit more considerate of their context and motivation in this. Obviously, it's understandable that a student doesn't want to get their cotton uniform wet while walking on campus. So I think emotion plays a big factor into this, and pairing my research with Webb worked out really well. Here are my works cited, and I will leave questions to you.
Sending them the right ID.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on.
Well, if we need to.
You think maybe should I log out and log back in?
Yeah. Is he? So he's saying that one does not seem to be working.
This looks different than.
So I think there's actually the option, you can send an invite from there as well.
Should we take questions while we try to figure this out?
I think technically, so this slot is still, this next 10 minutes is still slated for him on the schedule. So if we can't, for some reason, we will shift into questions, but I
So,
wanna.
sign in here, and then room.
Oh,
Two people.
oh, there's Nelson. So, yeah, I don't know the Drew. Perfect.
Drew's gonna present now.
He wants a practice run before his actual senior year.
What was Elsa's profile picture there?
Good morning, Nelson. We can probably bounce Drew.
Drew, good to see you. We're gonna kick you out and go do some work. Do some work. Oh, he kicked himself out. All right. What do I now do?
You allow him to share.
So click security. And then just click share screen. Okay. You should be able to now, Elson.
How do I close the meeting?
So you can just. Perfect. Yeah.
Make them louder, please.
How do we do volume?
Where's your whole face?
There's a wall. Allison, can you just do a sound check for us, please?
Yes, no problem. Hello?
Okay.
Good.
All
Alright.
All right, give me just one moment to get set, and I will cue you up, Elson. Thanks so much. All right, Elson, anytime you're ready. Ruth, yes, can you please email?
Elson, whenever you're ready.
Alright, so good morning everyone. My name is Elson and today I'll be asking the question, are we brainwashed? So ever since I've come to America, ever since I started hearing more voices from the world instead of just people from my own culture, I discovered that my country's government was notoriously known for its manipulation of thoughts, and according to my 17-ish years of experience in China, and I found some news, some information from the Western media to be true, and revealing, well, some to be exaggerated and biased. Well, as you can see on my slide, you can have a look of how many people from the Western world might think about the CCP. And, well, however, I'm not here to talk about politics or the CCP, but I will be talking about brainwashing. What is it, and are people in certain countries actually brainwashed, and are we brainwashed? And I'll have my answer to that, which is yes, we are under the media's influence, and most of us do. And well, I'm not trying to scare you or anything, but the answer is simply a yes, because the reason I'll be mentioning the later presentation. And luckily, there are things we can do to minimize it, to minimize the influence. And if you wish to be more of a independent thinker, you want to have your thoughts to be more original, you can try to follow my advice given below. So first, we can break down things into two questions. First, to what extent are we affected by the media? I myself did not realize how my way of thinking was actually shaped by the mainstream media and opinions until I did some research and mind searching. Now, this question is quite related to psychology because we humans are naturally want to match our attitudes and thoughts with the group, with the majority. But if we shift our focus on the social media, it can be more interesting. And the second, how do we notice when we're under manipulation or under the influence? And the answer to that question will be the solution of the problem. So, and that's why we first need to figure out how to distinguish between the unwanted information and the information that is actually useful to us. And how do we know if a piece of information we see online is just there by chance, or is it there because someone purposefully put it there to use it? And I would say the false information fed to our mind comes from three major areas: politics, commercials, and social media. And each of it has its own way of processing the information and making it more convincible to the general public. And you probably heard of them before. They have propaganda, commercialism, and some pretentious fabricated lifestyles. And first, we can take a look of the social media. And I'll be taking an example of bloggers. Well, 200 of years ago, someone discovered a huge diamond mine, the first diamond supply in South Africa. And the person who discovered it, he decided to intervene and to protect his own profit because there were too many diamonds back then. So he talked to this advertising agency in the United States, and they decided to give these little rocks some values. They gave them meanings. So it was since then people were convinced that these little carbon stones were symbolic of commitment and faithfulness in a romantic relationship. And we still do nowadays. And similarly, when we watch some videos, when we watch some YouTubers online, well, not all of them, but some of them, what they're doing is showing us their fancy lifestyles and selling us their ideas that there has to be something in our life to make everything complete. And that thing sometimes is a physical thing, and sometimes it's a concept. And we are becoming more exposed to their intended promotions. And speaking of social media, let's talk about how big of a part it is in our life. And every day we see at least 4,000 ads online, and we can barely realize it. And we think that we will eventually forget what is said on the commercials, but at the end of the day, all those pieces of information stay rooted in our mind because we just see it for so many times, and they will finally affect us in some way. That's because we spend a lot of time on social media. On average, an adult with a full-time job spends 2 hours on social media, and we teenagers spend about 8 hours on apps like Snapchat, Instagram, and YouTube, and that is 1/3 of the day. With that much information taking in, it's hard for us to figure out what is right and what is wrong. We're like a new generation of couch potatoes, except we slide our phones, not just sitting in front of the television, and we are becoming more numb to the newsfeed. We just absorb the information without thinking. And sometimes when we try to get things done, many of us just end up in swiping up and down and jumping between short videos on TikTok and becoming, well, we spend too many hours on them. So why don't we try to keep track of our screen time? Like, if you have an iPhone, it will be easier because it's in your settings. And when you see the numbers on the phone, and you might feel guilty because when you ask yourself, when we are surfing through the internet, are we actually using the time wisely, or are we comfortable with being overwhelmed by the information? If the answer is not, then why don't we just take a break from it? Try to turn away from your screen and go for a walk, or you can talk to your family members and friends. If we simply do not click on the advertisements or log into our social media accounts, we wouldn't be affected by the big bang internet. I personally find my own peace when I read some books before I go to sleep. It really helps me to quiet down all the noises in my head caused by the disturbing stuff I see from the internet. But we can't stay away from the sources of information forever. We have to learn, we have to perceive new information in order to live. So why don't we learn how to process suggest you guys to adapt some critical thinking skills in order to live in this society with information overflow. If you were a critical thinker, you don't just evaluate the information, but you can also use the information to deduce some important facts and outcomes. And by analyzing outcomes, critical thinkers become better at figuring out the false information and focus more on what is useful to them. And we can start by asking some questions whenever we see a news article or just any online passage in general. Why is it here? Is it supported by facts and evidence? How is it going to affect me personally? Well, after asking questions like these, you might have the answer, might not, but things will turn out to be much more clear to you. And because the thinking process is what really matters, maybe the next time you read an article online, instead of just reading the words, and try to have your brain working by adding codes to it like a machine. And these questions will help you to improve and work on a thinking process. And the more you work on it, the less time it takes for you to figure things out. Our free will is a precious gift, I would say. It is beautiful. It is something we should all cherish and protect. We care about our freedom of thought. A couple of centuries ago, people's thoughts were manipulated by the empires. They were oppressed. But nowadays, we live in a more civilized society, so our collective mindset is affected by other things, many other things. And we cannot be sure about our way of thinking is completely original or just independent. But what we can really be sure about is our willingness to be free, to have our freedom of thought, and to protect our mind and be a free bird away from the cages. So here's my works cited, and thank you for listening.
Elson, I'll ask you just to hold on the line as we begin the question and answer, and for that, I will ask folks to come up to ask those questions for you, but we'll be cycling through the whole group here over the course of about the next 20 minutes or so. Is there anyone who wanted to get started? And this can be any of our panelists this morning. Okay, so I'll get started. The first question. So Ruth, for you, so in the course of your research, have you found that the increase in alcohol consumption that you said it had increased as a result of COVID-19 and some of the factors that folks are dealing with, which, by the way, I love the way that you were able to make this contemporary, right? Not just to talk about the issue abstractly, but to look at it in this particular moment. So I thought that was really effectively done. Have you found now that some of the strictures have been lessened, folks are socializing more, are you seeing any information that this has decreased as a problem, or in some ways has it become a habit that has to be treated in its own way? I'm just curious if any of that turned up in your research.
It didn't turn up in my research. If I had to say though, I do think it has lessened a bit because during COVID, companies did deliver alcohol to houses, which made it very easy for teenagers to get a hold of alcohol.
Oh, interesting.
Also with the masks, fake IDs were a lot easier to use, and kids were able to get them from gas stations and things like that easily with fake IDs and the mask. So it's a lot harder for them to get that with those people being able to take off their masks to see their face for IDing, and not sending alcohol to homes anymore has lessened it. I do think that some teenagers probably have become addicted to alcohol and other things, and that it will be a problem that we might have to deal with, but I don't think it will be a huge, like a majority of high school students. I think it's going to be like a small amount.
Yeah. I guess it'd be interesting to see the research 5 years down the road, right? The sort of impact and legacy of this.
It will.
Great answer.
I wanna ask you a question.
Okay.
And I've gotta say something about this way. Being the oldest person in the room, I'm probably the only one in here who knows that, or who's aware that at the end of the Vietnam War, we lowered the drinking age to 18, which I turned 18 1 month after we pulled fighting forces out of Vietnam, thank God. But what happened was for a brief period of time, a few years, 18-year-olds could legally buy alcohol and drink and all that. We lost a lot of 18-year-olds to 21-year-olds during that period of time. The law changed again and it went back up to 21 and has remained there. I was curious, were you suggesting that the legal drinking age should be raised from 21? And I'm not finding fault with that, I'm just curious. Is that what you were
I
saying?
think it would lessen availability. With high school students being close, like seniors are 18, they have a lot of friends that are 21.
Certainly.
So a lot of times their friends can get them alcohol, and so they can bring it to parties and things. And your brain's not finished fully maturing until 25. But I do think that America doesn't want to raise the drinking age any higher than it already is. So I don't think it will ever happen. I do think it will lessen availability, but kids will find a way to get alcohol, no matter what you do.
Well, a big thing during the Vietnam War was the idea that, okay, if I'm old enough to be drafted, I'm old enough to go fight, I'm old enough to drink.
Yeah.
And so you're probably right, if we raised it, it would help, but
Mm-hmm.
it's probably not gonna
It's not
happen.
gonna happen, no. Kate?
So your research and everything showed that students and teenagers are drinking a lot, and I just want to know how you would motivate them to stop drinking if they are wanting to do that.
I think the best motivation to help stop is just telling them of the consequences. A lot of kids don't actually know the consequences of having alcohol and then even drunk driving. The zero tolerance policy actually means that if you get pulled over drunk driving, they can immediately revoke your driver's license, which to some students can be terrifying. And if you know that, then you would never, consider drunk driving. But a lot of kids don't. But you also don't know, like, how many years you could be put in juvie and things like that, or even if you're old enough, be put in jail for having alcohol. So I feel like if we let people know the consequences, it can help lower and stop them from being motivated to drink alcohol. Yes. Camille, would you like to go first?
So I know in other countries, I'm not sure if you just focus on the U.S. or other countries too, but other countries have a much lower drinking age. I think in Italy it's like 16 or so.
Mm-hmm.
Did you look into other countries that have lower drinking ages and their issues in drunk driving, or just focus in the U.S.?
I did do a little research into other countries. I know it's similar to France. You're allowed to drink. In France, if your parents give it to you, it's from a really young age you're allowed to drink. The problem with America is a lot of us have the mentality of binge drinking. While in France, they're taught from a young age to drink in moderation, only drink a little bit. In places like Italy, they're taught to drink in moderation and only a little bit. And from a young age, they know how much they need to drink and when they need to quit. America, we don't know that. We're not taught, just a little bit. Have as much as you want until you want to stop. And so that's why I don't think a lower drinking age will work very well in America. But I did do some research into that. Yes.
This kind of goes along with Kate's question,
Mm-hmm.
which would be, like, I just forgot it. Give me a second.
It's okay. Take your time.
Anyone else has a question? Go ahead. Because both of us talking.
All right. Anyone? Mr.
I'll ask one. I mean, there's a lot of different questions I think we can ask, but on one of your slides, there was a graph that said like 8th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade, and I guess the percentage of, I guess it was according to surveys, the percentage of eighth graders, I think it was like 22%, percentage of 10th graders, it rose up to high 30s, and then it was
It
around
was 39%.
50% as seniors. So, you know, it was kind of rate, you know, every 2 years, it's going up, you know, 15% or so. So in theory, I'm thinking if you want to lower, if you want to get that 50% lower on the seniors, we need to lower it at younger ages. So what is, I guess, what is something that we can do that, and maybe even here at Webb, what is something that Webb could possibly do to affect, you know, 6th, 7th, 8th graders, whether it's here at Webb or in other communities, to try to get the information out there, I guess.
I do think that if we start with the middle schoolers, eventually when the middle schoolers get to high school, that will significantly decrease. If we end it in middle school, then it won't be so bad in high school for them. For middle schoolers, I think it's best if we, again, let them know of the consequences and teach them, and spread it to other schools. We could help cascade. I think Webb does a pretty good job at teaching the middle schoolers. Mr. Poole was great when we had him. If we bring him back, do some things like that where we bring people in who are professionals at teaching children how to live anti-alcoholic lives, and you know, focus on the middle schoolers. It will raise, when the middle schoolers get into high school, then they'll already know and not be motivated to drink that much. I really do think we should help Cascade, put in a club similar to Feet to Feet and other schools around it. Central in Shelbyville has a really bad drinking problem. Community High School in Unionville has a pretty big problem. And I feel like, and Murfreesboro probably has a few that have some problem with drinking. And I feel like if we can work together and get schools involved in having programs like Feet to Feet, where they're teaching the middle schoolers, it could help a lot.
So at this moment, I'm going to try to move questions along because I want to make sure that the rest of our panelists do have an opportunity. If we have some time at the end, I would love to lead back to your question. My question for you, Trey, so your proposal, and I love that you're thinking practically of, right now we are thinking at the administrative level, how is it that we retool our schedule based on what we've learned this year and the successes that we've had, and I appreciate the fact that you pointed to the way the club structure works. So you mentioned the idea, and I just want to make sure I'm clear on this, of a planning period that functions for student leaders. During that time, what are those folks who are not? You gave us the percentages. It was maybe, I could be wrong, was it about 28% of students are student leaders?
Yes, 28 to 72.
During that time, what are other club members, other folks doing?
Web students are already overworked as it is, so it would be a study hall essentially for them. Or possibly, if, like, let's say that I was taking my planning period for Feet to Feet, and I needed for Camille and Aspen to go do something for Feet to Feet for me. And they were fine with that. Then I could get them to, like, we were putting up posters or something like that. So not exactly a club time, but a time to plan and a time to get stuff set up.
Okay. And I guess my follow-up question on that, I don't mean to monopolize the time here, and I'll certainly turn it over in a second. I guess the other thing I was thinking, connected to that percentage is, how is it that we more effectively recruit student leaders? Because you talked about a number of motivated folks who are in this room who have taken on those leadership positions, but relatively speaking, according to the data that you gave us, that is still a small percentage. So I think not just preparing those, but how is it that we find folks who are willing to step into those roles? As you said, it's a pretty monumental task for an 8th grader to move into that position. So aside from the training, how do we find folks that are willing to take on those responsibilities along with everything else they have to juggle?
Well, I think the biggest problem with our student leader program is essentially, let's say that there was a club of 5 people in this room, and the club was me, William, Ruth, 4 people in this room, me, William, Ruth, and then Caitlin. And then we all graduate, Caitlin becomes the leader because she's the only one left. That's how, honestly, I've gotten a few of my leadership positions, and that's how I know a bunch of other people have gotten to leadership positions at Webb. I feel like leadership positions should be something someone tries to strive and rise to do, not just, oh, you're left, here, lead this club. because I was back from Feet to Feet, because that's what I'm going to draw back to. When I was first here in 6th grade and I was in Feet to Feet, I loved it. And I wanted to be a leader of Feet to Feet ever since 6th grade. So I was driven to be a leader of Feet to Feet, and look, I'm president now. So I think that's just another example. I was driven to be I was driven to have an improv club, and now I'm running an improv club. Things like that. People who are driven to do what they're trying to do, and maybe make there be an incentive for it. Whenever I was doing my research, I saw that there was a school up in Wisconsin, I think, I'm not entirely sure on that would give their student leaders something like special that they could wear, and they had a dress code similar to Webb. Like, vaguely, for example, my library pin that I have on it was something like that. It was just like certain pins for your club or something like that. And I think that would be a really nice motivator, because not only would it give them a sense of pride for leading the clubs, but it would also it would give them a little individuality in the monogamous or homogeneous dress code of wearing.
Being your resource that you went to find out how to be a leader, and you seem to have learned that I boss people around
For a living.
for a living. But I think you also would have to admit that I talked to you about how to motivate people because they want to do something for you, because when you don't hold a grade or a paycheck over, you have to get them to do it because you want them to. My question though is, while I think you've got some good proposals and ideas about how to groom the leaders and how to get them started and help them and not just be thrown in with the water. How do you feel about how being thrown into it like you were, and coming to me and whoever else you would have gone to for ideas and help, how did that help you grow as a leader?
Well, if we go back to my metaphor, it's a coin toss right there. Because for me, it helped me a lot because I was driven and I wanted to do good and I was ready to fight for everything to go. Feet to Feet was stopped, like the affluence program stopped my freshman year. But I got it started back my sophomore year because I wanted to have it done. But I'm sure there are other people who would not be as motivated as I was. And it would just lead to, if we go back to the throwing a baby in the water analogy, it's a sink or swim. Some would swim and learn how to take everything well, and others would just drown. And I don't think Webb wants any drowned babies. So. It's like failing.
So with the sink or swim analogy, do you think that, I don't know, this is kind of an interesting question. Do you think that only those who have the motivation to swim should be leaders, considering that they have that obvious motivation to continue with that path? You know, you have more reliance on them since they, pulled themselves through that. Do you think that that makes any difference in their leadership skills?
I definitely think that people who actually work for their position should have, I have worked for this position in Feet to Feet for 4 years now, and so now I am recognized as a somewhat powerful entity as a student leader. So I think that if someone actually does work for their position and tries to make the club and the school a better place through it, that at least they should be recognized higher as in the school for trying to get things approved for their club.
All right, so I'm going to try to get to the question, but I've got some good commentary because I like a lot of the stuff you said, and this year, moving into the Dean of Students role, I have noticed if we just take clubs for instance, it's organized chaos at best, maybe. And I say that in the sense that I don't think it's clear sometimes to faculty and students of who is actually leading the club. And obviously I think some more well-established clubs are, it's a little easier, and like you said, if you were part of Feet to Feet at a young age, and you've been a leader there 2-3 years, there's consistency. But what happens when you leave, right? What happens when you leave this year and there's no one behind you, right? So I'm getting there. So, I like the idea of a leadership class. And I guess the question is, what level, like what grade level should that be open to? And should that be a prerequisite for leading a club?
And I'm just for the sake of time, I want, if it's possible to give a relatively concise answer to that, because we have only about 5 minutes or so remaining, and I wanna make sure our other panelists have an opportunity
My
to.
bad.
No, that's.
Alright, so essentially I think this class should be open to anyone from 8th grade to senior year, because I think that senior year people could still use it or going off to college, and 8th graders could still use it even just leading their own class. And I do not think it should exactly be a prerequisite for leadership, however, I think it should definitely strengthen the leadership of a student.
Okay, thank you.
What's my question?
Well, I was gonna say, I reserved this slot, because as I said, I don't wanna monopolize the, but, if there's anyone who wanna, yeah.
So, in your opinion, in looking at web, how, I guess it's a more philosophical question, like how big of a problem is stealing at web? So if just if my one cup gets stolen, and that's it, is that a problem? So is any little thing a problem, or are you looking more at bigger things in constant stealing?
So,
And if so, how do we get that across to everyone that, stealing is bad? Borrowing is actually stealing.
so I made a survey that kind of showed the, demand for my proposal, but it also included a student's perspective on how they thought stealing was related to what your question asked. And most students did think that stealing umbrellas is a problem at Webb. But I guess in general, my experience on the Honor Council, we have not had that many cases in which students steal relative to other cases. It's mostly in middle school, a couple high schoolers, but I think the beauty with my plan on the proposal is that there's an incentive not to steal. With umbrellas in every building on campus, you kind of take out that need or like incentive. So I think Webb should focus more on making announcements and followed up by possible repercussions that aren't too harsh, and giving students an incentive not to steal rather than just reprimanding them by telling them no all the time.
Quick, concise answer to this next one. It's a follow-up, just because it's, do you think middle schoolers should go to the Honor Council, or do you think there should be something different for them?
Is that specifically for stealing issues, or?
I think in general, anything. Do you think, as the head of the Honor Council, and I guess related to stealing, do you think middle schoolers should go to the Honor Council, or do you think there should be a separate thing for them as president of the Honor Council, Will Taylor?
So summed up, if the accuser wants to take someone to the Honor Council, that person will be brought to the Honor Council, that student, and I don't have a choice in it. I personally think there should be pre-meetings, and I even proposed that to the dean of the Honor Council.
I know, but if I'm saying, if you got to make the rules,
yes.
do you think middle schoolers should go to the Honor Council, or you think there should be something different for that?
Yeah,
Because
I think
they're
there should be something different for that, like a
Okay.
pre-meeting.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, this is, and I'm actually really excited that there are so many questions on this. And if we have some time, and I promise I'll have some questions to follow up on this as well. Elson, thank you so much. You've been waiting so patiently there. And I don't, did anybody have a question they want to jump in first on Elson? So just real quick on this. So Elson, I was thinking, as you were speaking, and for me as an English teacher, right, and the fact that we devoted one of our readings this year to media studies, right, and thinking about the way information is presented to us. But I think that the great struggle, so the solution that you offered was that education and the practices of critical thinking. But the problem I think there is that we sort of live in this kind of post-factual or alternative fact era. And so where does that critical thinking component, obviously we're addressing that within the school system to some extent, but where else does it happen? Can it come from technological means? So I know, Facebook, for example, they've begun flagging information. Do you see that as an effective component of this process of critical thinking? or do you see it instead as detrimental? Does it actually, does it convince folks that confirmation bias that we've talked about, does it convince them that, no, they're only gonna give me information that I believe or don't believe? So I guess what I'm saying is, where are we getting that critical thinking, in short, aside from in schools, and is that sufficient?
In terms of critical thinking, I believe, well, we're not naturally born with this skill. Nowadays we live in a society where you can have access, easily have access to all sorts of information, and the technique the method to learn how to critical thinking is one of the information you need. And I think the process of searching for that specific thing, that specific piece of information you need, is actually a way of training yourself of how to find the right source you need, how to find and filter out all the other stuff you do not need. And I think that process is really what helps you to increase your ability of critical thinking. And also about confirmation bias, I think it is something that it's a psychological feature that I think we all have, but it is our job, or we can try to fight against it, because also about critical thinking, the confirmation bias is not necessarily against it, but it is a factor that that slows down our critical thinking skills. If that makes sense. So yeah, back to what I said earlier, I think that we all should just have as much possibility as possible to practice critical thinking skills as much as we need, and that is what matters to us nowadays.
So the power of education, which I think it probably at this point is as good a place to stop this panel as any, and I honestly wish that we had a bit more time in this, but this was a fantastic conversation. Can we get one more round of applause for all of our participants? Thank you so much, seniors. Breathe easy. You can pull those blazers off and throw them over your shoulder casually as you leave the rooms now, knowing that you've accomplished one more step towards graduation. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. I really enjoyed our conversations, and I look forward to continuing these conversations. Take care, all.
Bye, Elson!
Elson, fantastic job. Thank you so much. Yes, sir. Can I look into what?
Because some of the other Jamaicans are saying that they got some of their credits for art.
Okay.
And